Hello everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of Verge, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the Thursday edition of my bi-weekly behind-the-scenes DM-only live stream Crafting Icewind Dale, in which I build, write, and prepare for our next session of Rime of the Frostmaiden. If you are playing characters of Robin, Frey, Celeste, Edmund, or Thimbleweed, avert thine eyes, because this stream is not meant for you. But for the rest of you, welcome. Of course, there will be lots of spoilers. We stream our D&D sessions live on YouTube every Friday. Watch all of our D&D sessions and reviews here on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Rogue Watson and join our official Discord server with invite link in the description below. If you'd like to support the channel, please check out patreon.com/RogueWatson. For our campaign, we use Roll20.net, and for streaming, I use Open Broadcaster software with Streamlabs. Almost made it through the intro without flubbing, despite me having that memorized and saying the same intro for quite a while now. We are we've entered technically year 2 of playing Rime of the Frostmaiden. We started back in April, I think maybe the last week of March of 2021. And I think as we talked on Monday's stream, I could see us easily going as long as we did for the Tomb campaign, which went just shy of 2 months and 87 sessions, I believe. And I could see, as we're at 74 right now, I could see this easily lasting another 20 sessions, just because of the, I think, additional stuff that I've added, and we overall have, I think, slightly shorter sessions than we did in Tomb. It's kind of hard because in Tomb we did like intermissions. We did kind of a break in between, so maybe we average like 2 hours and 45 minutes, but with like a 10-minute break in between. Whereas here we're averaging maybe 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's kind of hard to tell. We're also getting started later, so I think we're getting maybe a little bit less sessions, which also bumps it to taking a little bit longer. I think we've also taken bigger breaks in between. I know we took at least one 4-week break where we ran Forge of Fury, which was really fun, and then we've taken some various usual holiday breaks. So. But I could see it definitely lasting another couple months. Even though we've been in the end game since entering Caves of Hunger. At this point, there's no real side content. It's pretty much all getting through this dungeon and then getting to the Lost City, which is basically the finale. But that Lost City has a lot going on, and I'm actually expanding the hell to that Lost City, as I mentioned countless times before, with Dan Kahn's expanded Towers of Magic bundle. And I have recently finished the conversion. Maybe it needs a few finishing touches, but it's basically done, although I'm probably still going to actually just throw the maps on here myself, because for the conversion purposes, we can't actually use any of the official artwork. So we've had to use stock art for all the tokens, whereas obviously with my stream here, I can just use all the stuff that's already built into the compendium. So I don't know what would be quicker. I guess having the maps already done with dynamic lighting would be slightly quicker, but they're not very big maps. There are a lot of them, though. It's 8 different towers, which we can talk a little bit about Ithrin maybe outside of the towers, because that's, unlike Caves of Hunger, Ithrin is probably going to need a lot of changes and updates to make it work for my party and to lead to a satisfying conclusion. And we're still basically ahead of the action here. Although, as I mentioned on Monday's stream also, it sounds like the party is going to pretty much skip doing the vampire layer in the upper right corner, which I'm totally fine with at this point, and skip doing the Remoraz layer in the very middle of the map, which I'm also okay with. We've already kind of experienced them, and they want to just say, like, let's get the hell out of here. So that's fine, given that at this point, they don't know that there is another path they can take. They know there's another path they can take. What they don't know is where this path leads, and it turns out this is actually the shortest path they can take. Actually, that's not true. Technically, going through the Remorazes would be the shortest path they can take, but by avoiding the Remorazes, they can take this off-ramp and experience the entire right side of the map, which takes them through some, pretty compelling, interesting rooms, and then that will lead them to the exit. So, given the fact that we've already been in here for 4 or 5 sessions, and we're only as far as we are, they've just now made it to room. In fact, how many rooms have they actually done in this dungeon? This room has 40 technically rooms, and I use the term room as just an area that's been officially annotated as something happening here, even though there's like some caverns that have multiple or have the same annotation, for example. But I think if we count it up, we have done, all right, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, everybody has to do, basically, these first 4 rooms. I guess you could skip the one with a little bit of the vampire spawn in there. 5 with the tower, 6 with the first borehole in it, and the psychic haunting. 7, empty room. 8 has the arcane slab. 9 had the statue in it. 10 has the room of shadows. 11, technically a psychic haunt there. 12 for the Dracarith big fight and the loot there. And then 13 is basically the room they're in now. So they've done 13 out of the 40 rooms in this dungeon, and we're 5 sessions in. So in that case, I'm kind of okay with them deciding, okay, maybe we can try skipping some of the content, even though, I did make a little bit of work. But this is why you don't want to zero in too much, I think. When you do get ahead of the players, at least in these cases, I don't want to meticulously focus on very specific things unless they're for sure stuff that the player is absolutely going to hit. They're those important choke points. Otherwise, I think it's okay to get broad strokes and make sure you know what's going on. And then when you know the players are going to get there, or you have a much better idea the players are going to get there, then you can do these more minute zeroing in and making sure everything is absolutely perfect and well scripted and everything based on that. And this is that kind of the only way I could do this dungeon, because it was so freaking big that I just wasn't sure what we were going to see next. Pretty nice if they had some ways of invisibilizing themselves too. I know Thimbleweed can do it, but I don't think they have a normal invisibility spell they can do. If somebody had Pass Without Trace or something. It's funny, they've never really thought of doing kind of a stealthy approach other than sending their scout ahead first, which could prove fairly useful here, except for when they get to the thing in the ice. It will detect his thoughts and it will try to do its thing on him. It'll be funny that if he makes the save, I won't really explain perhaps what's going on, although maybe I do like the idea of when it does its thing, opening the door briefly and letting them seeing this thing in action and then closing it, so they're like, oh shit, what is that? And then maybe thinking that that's a really dangerous thing to do. And especially if it detects him while he's stealthing through it, they'll be like, oh shit. But you have a choice between going through that or going through the Remorazes, so it's the devil and the devil you're not quite sure of in this case. Everything of expanded towers, then it mostly replaces contents, you're not adding much. Yes. Yes, I see what you're saying about replacing content. It's definitely literally expanding the content, though. In most cases, there's a few. One of them I think had a hag coven just randomly hanging in there, because wizards can't not use hags in some context, even though they're really random. But most of them are to where there's really not much going on there, and these expand it and make it so there's a good amount going on there. So I do think it's going to make it a little bit longer. But you're right, they would normally have to do all these areas in general, and it just adds. I mean, especially one of them, the necromancy tower. I think it's a necromancy one. As written in the book, it's nothing, it's rubble, and you just have to clear out some crawling claws or something. There's nothing really going on there. Versus in the tower from Expanded Towers, it's a full other tower shrine with a big role-playing scene and possibly some combat and a lot of shit going on in there. So that kind of stuff is going to make it a little bit longer, but in a good way for sure. I would use most of this stuff. I was really thinking to jump ahead a little bit in my planning. There's a great bit in the Expanded Towers where the players have a chance of meeting several of the actual high necromancer, high enchanter, all the other various people. One of them, the one that's the most similar is probably the one that's been where the one's been turned into a green slot, and she's still a green slot, I think, in the Expanded Towers. But as a slot, she's kind of insane, I guess, now. But you have a chance of having the necromancer actually possess a player character and then try to raise his own body, because there's certain special enchantment rules on the Tower of Necromancy. And his whole thing is he just wants to find his girlfriend, who is the I believe it's the High Enchantress. And I was thinking how cool it would be, because my idea was to have one of those top wizards. The big twist is that it was Auril was one of them, and then she happened to make something. Maybe she stole another scroll or did so. I haven't worked out the details of it, but she was basically able to cast this very powerful spell that channeled the energy of the Mythallar into herself and made her ascend to having godlike powers. But in return, that's what actually crashed Aetherin. So she's responsible for all of that, but that's also where she drew her power from, and that's why she's very nervous and fearful about having the Mythallar power back up and figuring out what that means. But I would love for the fact of maybe if that High Necromancer, maybe the girlfriend was Auril, and that would give it a really interesting context for the players to maybe deal with Auril with an RP angle versus just a combat angle, or at least you do that as a way of like disarming her if they manage to actually work with him and maybe figure out that twist. It all requires certain things to fall into place to make that happen, and then that's one of the changes I'll have to make on top of adding the expanded towers of Aetherin, is adding the fact that I want one of those high wizards to have been oral, and maybe it might be better if I change that to the transmuter, because I feel like that would be more appropriate for transmutation. I'm not sure. Some of them work better than others in terms of I like the necromancer is already really well written and done. The evocation one, you don't meet him, but I think his tower reflects his he's like a pompous jock athlete. I think that works really fun. Versus other ones that don't actually have much of a role to play because they're kind of written out of it. Which the transmutation is one of them. Enchantress actually does play a pretty big role. She's actually an Ublex now, or controlled as an Ublex, which is an interesting angle. The other thing I'll have to do with the expanded towers and Aetherin in general is the fact that my players are higher level, and that's something the main adjustments I've been having to make to this campaign, which has been a challenge for me as a designer, although I think it's been very rewarding, and trying to use a lot of that tier 3 content that we really don't mess with very much. And that's mainly the adjustments I've had to make, is that the players, instead of being level 9, I think, going into Aetherin, I want to say, they will be level 13 going into Aetherin. So that means I'll have to just up all of the challenges, slightly, and tweak some of the DCs and stuff, and hopefully not have to add too much more work for myself. Forgotten Realms lore nerds in shambles, though. Probably. It is my world, and that's the story. I'm sticking to it. But yeah, I'm ignoring the fact that she's like this long-term goddess and pantheon and everything. And thankfully, my players don't give a crap. They're also not well versed in the lore. Anything outside of what's going on in our previous campaign. So it's very much like the MCU versus the comic books, basically. They're very they know the MCU. If our D&D campaigns were the MCU, clearly they're based on an ongoing universe, and yet they don't know the wider story behind that ongoing universe. They just enjoy the ones that they've been present in. So and I am not somebody who and a bad analogy with Marvel, because I actually do know comics very well, but I don't know Forgotten Realms very well, the lore, other than what I've learned from basically all of the 5th edition campaign books, adventures, and some of the source material. So I am playing it very fast and loose, but man, that just seems like such a cool story, and a really satisfying way to tie in, why the whole Frostmaiden storyline ties into Aetherin, because otherwise it doesn't almost tie in at all. It just feels very, very weird. Rightly uneducated in FR lore. I'm writing my Dragonlance review right now, and that's part of my introduction, is how not well versed I am. Although I had to give credit to myself in that I did play a lot of D&D video games, and I say did because there just hasn't been a lot of good recent ones lately, other than Baldur's Gate 3, which I think is finally supposed to come out officially this year. But those were all Sword Coast stuff, as far as I'm aware. It was, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 that I've played, and then Neverwinter Nights, all those expansions, Neverwinter Nights 2. So I did actually play all those games. So that's everything that and I played a few of the old ass gold box games in the 90s, but I was so young that I don't think I could recall anything other than it just felt like generic fantasy stuff to me. I think it wasn't really until the that Black Isle era with Neverwinter Nights and Baldur's Gate, where I was like a teenager, that I really started paying attention to all that stuff and enjoying it. But that's basically the basis for all my D&D lore until we got to 5th edition, and then I learned about some more stuff. But I think it might be worth still going over Caves of Hunger stuff, even though I'm ready to get out of here, and I'm sure my players are too. I think, as I mentioned, we'll spend probably at least 2 more sessions here. Even if they make a beeline for it, we've got to deal with the Thing in the Ice, a possible Spinning Mimic here. I think I'm going to replace the Mummy with a Mask with just a regular blue-skinned Majin who just looks like a weird alien thing that the players are going to have no context for whatsoever, and I think that's interesting enough for them to break out. And then this figure will just silently make its way basically down to Aetherin, and it won't be able to it would understand Laros and Elvish, I guess. I'm basically taking away its telepathy and saying it can't communicate back, I think. Although it can use a suggestion spell, and it would definitely attack anybody who tried to stop it from returning back. The one thing I could do is have it. Oh, it straight up says understands the language of its creator but can't speak, and then telepathy 30 feet. Maybe it could say something telepathic like a recorded message, like this one. Um, I don't know, some in LaRose, and maybe that's worth doing. I'm not sure, but this one must return to its workplace or something, like a very robotic thing, and maybe that would be more interesting for the players to deal with versus just having it be silent. But it would just, if they decide to break it out, it would come out and just make its way down to age 36, where we really need to start planning on what's going to happen here with the Dryad. If I want to mention the Drow, I believe last time I did, I can zoom back in, apply the new Nothics from one of the expanded towers, the Tower of Divination, added new Nothic stat blocks, including the Nothic Stalker, which is essentially a rogue, and the Nothic Preeminent, which is a kind of an attack wizard with a permanent blink spell. It seemed rather cool. I think I'm going to keep that one waiting in the wings, though. I don't want to really tip my hand too much on that one. Maybe treat the Stalker as like a kind of a boss of these Nothics, but this is a really weird scene in H37 where the players are expected to like role play with them for some reason, even though I believe Nothics later on are used as kind of the shock troop minions. I'm in Curse of Strahd and we plan to finish around level 18. Wow, that's impressive. Are you DMing or are you playing? As I'm curious how the DM managed to change that so much, because I think that's as far as I know, a similar one where you like enter the castle at like level 9 or something, and it's, you know, very much a level 10 dungeon or something. So that would be pretty epic to make that those drastic of changes, unless you're saying that we added like this whole other campaign on top of it, which would be pretty interesting. If you haven't already, check out my recent review of the Doomed Forgotten Realms Fall of Vecna, because that is a legit tier 3 and 4 campaign. It's a sequel to Rise of Vecna, which is the cool, like, what if, you know, all the 5e campaigns ended in failure and the world was forever changed, and turns out Vecna was like the big bad behind everything, and it provides a lot of cool stuff to do. It's very much whips the players around all these fun moments and epic battles and stuff. It's kind of combat heavy, but it feels like the designers have a good grip on what players like in D&D, which is, you know, just memorable moments, larger than life characters, cool ass battle scenes. Like, you know, it feels very like cinematically paced, I think, in a good way. And Fall of Vecna looks like a very legitimate tier 3 and 4 campaign, which we just do not get with 5e material. There's just no support for that, so that's been pretty cool. The noble scholars, religious leaders, very few people be educated. I did play Icewind Dale 2 a while ago, and it was really fun having done Rime of the Frostmaiden. Interesting. I have not played Icewind Dale 2. I did play Icewind Dale 1, and I actually, you might already know, I live streamed it here on the channel back when I was live streaming video games. I think that was one of the last ones I ended up doing. And I found it extremely difficult in the beginning, frustratingly so, horrifyingly frustratingly so. And then once I got over that initial difficulty curve, I think things clicked along a lot better for me. And I was able to enjoy it from there on out, I think. And I did complete it. Certainly had its challenges, but yeah, once you get over that initial hump of just, I mean, they got it. Like the first dungeon is like, hey, we're gonna throw like a dozen orcs at you, and I'm like, I'm level 2. Like, what the fuck are you doing? And it's fun to play those games where you make your own party too. You do. I'm torn because obviously I love games where I have well scripted party members, you know, and even doesn't have to be isometric stuff. It can be, you know, like a Mass Effect or something where you've got, you know, your cool party members and you love them and you just love hanging out with them. But I also love that old school mentality of like, hey, you get to build your own, you know, D&D party of players and really dig into the mechanics and the combat creation and go from there. And games like Pillars of Eternity and I think the Divinity series, they let you do both options. You had some wonderful pre-designed characters you could play with, and they were awesome companions, but you could also just make your own party members. And if you wanted to, you could make a total party of just your own characters, which is really fun. And at one point I actually did a second playthrough of, I think, the first Pillars game. I didn't end up finishing it. I got like halfway through and played some of the DLC, but I made like the characters from our first D&D campaign. I had like Kalinar and Kethra and Miri and all those folks, and it was cool. It was really fun being able to just make my own party and go from there, but not something I want to do for the first run through because they had a lot of great rewritten characters. The mage use sign language. That's interesting. I don't know if does D&D have rules for that. Is that what like thieves? I always thought of thieves' can as being kind of a version of sign language, but not sure that was ever mechanically explained about how characters can use that. I did think about obviously using the shush thing as a way for them to cast suggestion, which is something they would probably try to do at first versus just outright attacking. ID games that are super hard at the start that said they were D&D in general, then LOL. Yeah, I was thinking that was honestly, as a teenager, I bounced off hard of Baldur's Gate 1 because of that difficulty and just how rough it is in the beginning. And I understood a lot of RPGs were like that at the time, and not realizing that was because D&D was like that at the time. That I found it so frustratingly just like, oh, I'm so weak. I have to kill like rats, and I get killed really easily. Like it just felt, like the power fantasy just took too long to come online. And I suspect that's why a lot of people really liked Baldur's Gate 2. Obviously, it's got a fun story and fun companions. Everything else is really good about it. But you know what? It starts at fucking like level 8. You're breaking out of this like high-powered dungeon of a prison of this wizard's tower at the start of that campaign. And so instantly you feel powerful, and your whole party has like a lot of cool power and things available, and it goes from there, and it's really really cool. So I'm one thing I am glad is 5e fixed that in a lot of ways, right? Like I think they might have gone a little bit too far with making characters just really powerful really quickly. And baked in without having any magical equipment. That's always been a complaint of mine for 5e, but I do like the fact that you get like, your max hit points and your d6 hit die is the lowest. Like just get over the fact that like, I want all the player characters to be better than a normal person automatically, because you are the stars. Like, you should be a little bit extraordinary in some way, and not just, like a wet paper sack is gonna, like a rat murder you or something. That just feels all kinds of silly. So I'm glad they at least went that far into it. And I will say but even then, a lot of the official campaigns, they don't really start until you get to like 3rd level, or even like Storm King's Thunder, it's like 5th level or something. Like even Wizards is like, yeah, fuck those low levels. Like we're just trying to get you out of there as soon as possible. Level 1 especially just feels like such bullshit that I can easily skip it. I will say, I keep teasing my Dragonlance review, which is coming. Dragonlance does a really fun thing with 1st level where they say, hey, you're just going to do like these little solo ventures, like as almost as character building for your characters in the 1st chapter, and then we're going to get to the real campaign, which starts at level 2. I love that. That's an awesome opening, and I think all D&D campaigns should actually do that. So I'm really enjoying what they did with Shadow of the Dragon Queen's intro for that. Love composing my own parties. Missed that Solasta lets you do it, and it's 5e. Yes, Solasta is a great example of that. At the same time, I do think it would have been really cool had Solasta had the options, like some of the bigger budget ones, like Pillars of Eternity, where they had, basically pre-gen characters that were baked into the story. Although Solasta does an interesting thing that I rarely see, where they actually said, we're going to do voice acting and personalities, and we're going to try to figure out what your custom characters are based on like the traits and things you've selected. It doesn't always work very well, and unfortunately, the acting is not great in those games, if I may say, but it's a bold move for them to do, and I kind of respect the hell out of it, that they were like, we want you to make your own characters, but we're still going to apply like the usual stuff that you would see in a game with with pre-generated characters that we've made, which is having them be full of personalities and voices and stuff, which was pretty cool. But yeah, I love making my characters. I'm the kind of person that when I was playing Neverwinter Nights, this was a precursor to me being a D&D designer, if you will, for my own games. I would just make characters like crazy. I would design characters and write their backstories and write different builds, and just had a blast doing that. I just thought that was so much fun, even though only like 1/4 of them ever actually went on any individual adventures. Although in the day, man, with Neverwinter Nights, you could download countless modules and actually use a lot of those characters, which was awesome. They weren't all big ass campaigns. They were more like Phandelver sized or even shorter. And some good discussions here. I'm not actually talking about my campaign, but I enjoy these chats. So yeah, the main thing I need to prep for, I feel like everything is done in Caves of Hunger except for the meeting with the Dryad, because I just need to figure out what information she knows, what she's willing to share, and commiserate over the fact that the Dryad stat block is kind of garbage. This one again. And yeah, it does say that the Null Vampire makes a final appearance. I do have him waiting in the wings with a contingent of vampire spawn, mainly as a way of saying, hey, you never dealt with this vampire, and now he's realizing his food is going to go away, so he is going to get bold enough to actually attack with full force. Or I could skip that entirely and just be like, fuck it, we've spent here long enough, it doesn't feel right to have the vampires attack you. I don't know, I could go either way, but I've got them waiting in the wings. Maybe if the party decide, they have a scene, they fight the Nothics, they decide to go, hunker down for a long rest, maybe right before they do that long rest. Or I could be mean in it after the long rest, when they come out of the tiny hut because they dared to long rest with the vampire still around. It attacks them with a full contingent of these vampire spawn and has time to prepare for that. So I could think about doing that as well, just to put a final note on that. Even though they won't permanently destroy it because vampires are a pain in the ass like that, right? When you kill them, they go into mist form and they just go back to their lair. You have to actually destroy them at their lair, or I guess destroy the lair itself. And by lair, I mean like their coffin, to stop their regen. But I could skip it entirely. We'll see. Let's see. Maricola trees are alive. Canopies thick with frosty leaves. Branches bearing purple pears, which is the fun, like, hey, you get a little cantrip temporarily. Low broken wall. This is actually... It is dynamic lighting. Okay. That's going to look... What does that look like for the players? Let's grab somebody. Got... Grab Thimbleweed. What does that look like? I don't think the trees themselves have sight blockers, which is interesting, even though their trees usually block line of sight, but the walls do. Okay, that looks interesting. Broken up walls. Did we give the trees line of sight blocker, or is that going to be too distracting? How big are these trees supposed to be? I saw magic trees, or it doesn't really say. Grove of pear trees. I mean, they look decently big. They're like 10 feet across. Like that would block some line of sight. Unfortunately, it's really hard to do line of sight blocking in Roll20 because it's all or nothing. You can't really create like a weird like filtered effect like you could with a real tree. Like, you can kind of see behind it, but there's kind of blocking a little bit. You have to do these stark, black lines everywhere, and it gets really ugly if you try to make little dashes, I think. So typically you'll see like X's or tiny circles in the middle to dictate like, okay, like literally the trunk would be a line of sight blocker and maybe some branches and whatnot, but I might be okay with just leaving the trees open because we've already got the walls there. Let's see. Enchanted by Netherese Arcanist to endure high altitude marsh weather. I know I've read this probably 4 times already. Magic has enabled the trees to thrive even in these icy caverns. Essentially, the grove's survival is a dryad named Hathawin. Resides in the southernmost tree. If the dryad dies, the trees die. Isolation made Hathawin lonely, and the dryad hungers for conversation and companionship. I do like making her a little bit on edge for that, but that doesn't have to be revealed until the players maybe leave her, and then I think it'd be cool if you even had it to where they were trying to like, okay, thanks, and she's like, oh, you can't leave, you have to stay, and maybe she actually has some kind of cool plant powers that a normal dryad doesn't, and turn that maybe into a fight, especially if she initially tells them like, oh, there's some dangerous stuff around, and maybe points them to the Nothics, so the Nothics come in and just attack, and she hides, and then the players and then she becomes a combatant later on if the players are not figuring out a way to deal with her socially. Although clearly you would have to give her some extra powers because a Dryad baseline is a CR1. Fruit tree is probably skinny trunks, not much blocking line. Good point. Good point. There is something called a Duskthorn Dryad. In fact, I think I used this in one of our patron games from Tomb of Beasts. Mountain Dryad from Tomb of Beasts 2. I think this one has like demon energy or something. I just searched Dryad to see if there were some other options, but I could just give her some other plant powers. I like how every female monster that's not a hag has to be like sexy in some way, even though there's no reason for that. It's like it's a fucking tree person. I guess it's a fae, technically. But that's humans for you. That's probably, we could probably blame like maybe Greek mythology for that. I'm not sure what the start of that was, other than humans just like sexy things. Lights, Druidcraft, Charm Person. I was thinking definitely Entangle. Mark Skin, Counterspell, Dispel Magic, Fog Cloud, Shillelagh, Suggestion, Wall of Thorns. That's good. Draw once per day. This is a CR3 with a bunch of spells. The easiest thing to do would be to turn her trees into awakened trees, I think. I might actually just use this stat block straight up. It's just more interesting. Because it still has magic resistance, speak with beasts and plants, tree stride. Basically just give her spell casting and over 3 times the hit points. Way better armor class. Yeah, this is a much better stat block. I didn't have to give her weapons or anything. I say we upgrade her to a Duskthorn Dryad. I like that. Welcome to the campaign, Duskthorn. Take a look at your spells. I just like the idea that she's willing to talk to the player. She's going to be very companionable. Probably forthcoming about information about Netheril and Ithrin, although it doesn't really say. Tekalilia is present. Icewind remains hidden in her tree until the Null Vampire leaves or is destroyed. Tekalilia has never seen the Dryad and is unaware of her presence. That's interesting. So I guess he maybe never made it this far. If given the chance, Icewind tries to engage the characters in conversation, speaking Elvish or Sylvan. He hopes to keep them in the grove for as long as possible. If the characters try to leave, Icewind tries to charm one of them into staying and keeping her company. That'd be a cool way to start the fight, for sure. Maybe the players are, maybe she grows increasingly aggressive, casts Charm Person, and then we can roll for initiative. Depending on how the players react to that. Let's see, the Dryad does know the following information. Netherese magic binds the Dryad to the grove and keeps the trees alive. I assume this was like a garden. It says the grove of pear trees was enchanted by Netherese Arcanist to endure high altitude and harsh weather. Alright. Now I've assumed that this city was flying around and then crashed in the cave, and then the crash destroyed most of the population. Everybody was fucked, and then a few survivors made it to the Caves of Hunger. But they didn't try to like make this garden in the Caves of Hunger. That seems insane to me. So I always figured we're seeing pieces of Ithrin in Caves of Hunger because it literally crashed in here and got embedded here. And it just happens that this ripped up section of this garden or whatever got, or orchid, what do you want to call it, got separated from the city and was managed, and parts of it managed to survive here, and it still survived because of the Dryad's magic, which was itself chanted by Netherese Arcanists. So in other words, wouldn't she know everything about, if she was literally living in Ithrin? I mean, I guess her knowledge would be limited to the garden she was at. Is there a garden area in Ithrin? Is there more? I'm just trying to figure out how much she knows. I have to just go to the location, wouldn't we? Causeway, Wizard Spires, the stadium. Hour 1. The prison, which I'm probably going to skip because the whole doppelganger thing is weird. Literally giving them Orvex, which is the like person who knows everything. But hopefully they keep Villain alive this long, and they've still got the villains with them. So I think between all those NPCs, we should be good on NPCs. Oh yeah, catch up on the chat. I'm playing. The DM has upped a lot of stuff and introduced quite a bit of homebrew. Imagine Curse of Strahd fused with Castlevania. That sounds fucking awesome. I love it. I love it. Castlevania, you could probably mesh some of the games together. I'm mainly familiar with the later Castlevania games, like the was it Soma Cruz, all the GBA DS games. I played most of those and really enjoyed those. Those were really fun. Talk about just straight up dungeon crawls with some cool story in there too. Also played that recent one that was by Igarashi. What was it called? It was on Kickstarter. Blood Stained, I think. I played that game, which was fun. Very, very hard at the end. Really got crazy with the difficulty at the end, but that was a really fun, like, they've done a lot of those, right? Like Kickstarter video games where it's like, hey, we're, remember this series or game that you loved back in the day? Well, here's one of the designers or some of the designers, and we're making a facsimile of that game. And some of them do really well and are really well done, and others not so much. There's not really a precedent for whether those are all good or bad. I backed one that was supposed to be like Suikoden, Aiden Chronicles, which I think is supposed to come out this year, that I'm looking forward to. Man, I could design a fucking awesome D&D campaign based on Suikoden 2 also. I love these low levels. I do love these low levels where the players have to think first versus charging in to fight right at the start. Well, you have different players than I do. I see where you're coming from too. And that's partly why I do miss. And I'm necessarily saying that was the right thing that Wizards did, where they try to skip through those, fuck those low levels and let's try to get to like tier 2, because I don't think all D&D should be played at tier 2. I agree that 5e is probably best played at tier 2, given the amount of content we have and given where the power levels are between monsters and players. That's probably the sweet spot. But yeah, I'd think tier 1 is definitely worth playing through, and especially if you want to try to play maybe a horror or more grittier campaign. It's exponentially more difficult to do that when the players start getting more powerful. So it's just automatically way better to play those at lower level. I think early level 5e is a pretty good balance of power and danger, just IMO. I would argue tier 2 is a little better balanced for that, but I could see, especially if you're wanting things to be more challenging for the players, then yeah, tier 1. Reason why everything is sexy in D&D is so artists like me get commissions. I mean, nothing against it. Like I think I'm trying to phrase this very carefully and with some nuance. I think when it comes to sexy stuff, I like seeing a variety. I think if every single female character looks the same body shape, which I think a lot of anime suffers from, and a lot of thus JRPGs suffer from, that's way less interesting to me. What I really like to see, and again, it's mostly with female body shapes, is something that's more like Overwatch. I'm sure there's better examples out there, but Overwatch is very popular, where it has a multitude of shapes and sizes for men and women. I don't actually know if there's any like trans characters in Overwatch or not. And I think that's a lot more interesting. And those characters can be sexy or they can not be, which is the same as men. Like you can have sexy dudes or not sexy dudes. But men often can come in different shapes and sizes and monstrous forms that female facing body shapes often do not. So I like to see it when we do get that variety a lot. I know there was a complaint, for example, in the original Tomb of Beasts, and I think it's a legit complaint, where like they have several female villainous creatures. I'm trying to think of what the like archetypal would be, like a like a seductress type creature, I guess, like a succubus or something. And that's like the only, like they all look the same is I think the problem. Like there's just no, like there's a Rizulka and there's like a drowned maiden, and they're all the same kind of just sexy like bikini model creature who happens to be, actually a killer of people. And I think that is a legit complaint when they're just all the same like that. And I think it helps having some other voices in the room that say, well, wait a minute, can't we, create some more variety here with that? Like even just the physical look of this creature, I think is worth having a discussion about. But yeah, otherwise I think that's my main complaint when it comes to it, is like, oh yeah, the Dryad's always going to be this like just supermodel looking sexy plant creature. My game, she's full on bonkers. Save me from having to give too much ether and info. Oh, we're talking about the Dryad specifically? Saved me from having to give too much ether and info up, and she was super needy and desperate for one of the players to stay with her. I do want to kind of create that. Look up the Lizard Queen in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. She has a red gown and is described as majestic and slender. Oh boy. And sometimes it just comes down to like horny game designers. Like that is definitely part of it. And you can tell when like a lot of the voices in the, are in the room are men, and they're just making these designs. Like, of course they're going to be like, sexy, what they perceive as just sexy women characters. I definitely think that's part of it, but I think it also just gets boring when that's all you see, right? Like, I just like seeing that variety a little more. And I think there's probably more examples of that. And I think to an extent D&D itself has started, 5th edition really has started creating a lot of really nice varieties when it comes to just the way that humanoid figures and creatures look. I do want to do, Jason, what you're saying though. Super needy and desperate for the players to stay with her. I like that a lot. I really want to create an RP scenario that can devolve into combat as she gets more and more like, no, please stay with me and chat forever, because she doesn't really. She's kind of, presumably been alone for 2,000 years. And maybe she can tease the fact that I really don't know if I want to even mention the drow. I'd think about it like, do I just want to ignore that? And the problem is the drow make an appearance in Ithrin, so it gets kind of weird about if I stick to my guns on ignoring on the drow, do I then have to fix all the stuff where the drow appear? Or do I just, is it one of those things where like, oh yeah, you guys just never found the drow in the caves, and now you'll have to discover that, but then that's something I think she would know about. Yeah, she mentions that it's one of her bullet points. These 3 dark elves have passed through the Dryad's Grove on multiple occasions, coming and going through the southwest and southeast passages. Athwin hasn't spoken to them out of fear that they might harm her, which is very weird given how needy she is. I feel like she would have tried to converse with them if she is that needy and wants the conversation. So maybe they tried to harm her or something and she backed off, or maybe she tried to attack them. I don't know. I feel like that's incongruous with how lonely and hungers for conversation and companionship, even though her fear is greater than her hunger for companionship. Strange one-eyed creatures lurk in the cave far to the south. They follow the dark elves up from below after their last foray down the southeast passage. I guess I need to read more about is there more about that in the drow section? But what I'd like to do is maybe even less, maybe not even have the drow here, but just maybe I could put some dead drow in here, like they ran to the cave and the Nothics ate them. And then maybe as she's mentioning them, have the players, and if the players are making a lot of sound, I feel like the Nothics would just attack in here. I really want to treat them as more just kind of, they've lost their mind. They're just really creepy creatures, even though they've got enough intelligence. Do Nothics speak? I feel like I've looked this up before. Where are the drow in Ether? I don't remember that. Well, I don't think they're alive. They do speak Undercommon. That's weird. Only mainly found in the Underdark? Like, I know, maybe it's just the Towers of Magic that do it, but I know at least in one of the Towers of Magic, there's like a drow body in there, so it goes to show that, like, they tried to, like, loot something or somewhere, but maybe that's that designer trying to include the drow in Ethernet, and maybe they're not actually in the base game book. That could be possible. But I know they're in the Expanded Towers section. Yeah, I was still looking for if there's a garden thing. House of the Arcane. The school where they can drink from a goblet and gain another charm is very similar to the pair. The library with their Conoloth and the weird giant blind albino penguin has been awakened. I'm still not trying to wrap my head around that one. Why would they want to rescue this penguin? Artifacts from the Ithran lore table. Okay, so you can learn some useful information from there, I guess. Might have to. I don't know. An Arcanoloth clearly wouldn't be a match for the players in combat, so I feel like it would have to have some. If you want to make this a legitimate combat fight, or maybe it's not really meant to be one. The CR12. I mean, it's pretty strong, but it's only one creature. Ooh, she's got Finger of Death, though. That could be nasty. I guess I'm a big fan of those, like, fuck you, you're dead spells. Arboretum. Okay, so if I'm smart, I'd tie this into, because this feels like this would be part of the Arboretum. What does the Arboretum look like on the map? The necropolis. Y10. Oh, yeah. Clearly visible on the map. Also could be one of the first places they go. Canopy of golden leaves crowns the trees inside a sunken basin. The trees grow in stark contrast to their bleak surroundings. Their branches swing even though the air is deathly still. The grove is nestled in a hollow in the city floor. Vents spaced around its perimeter wall emit puffy gray vapor which rises above the treetops and disperses as rain. A illusory hemisphere above the arboretum projects a false sky. Now malfunctioning, the vista flickers between a wild storm and a vast field of stars. The nether oak grows at the heart of the arboretum. For centuries, Netherese mages crafted their wands and staffs from the wood of this oak. Which I think they have to go there as part of the Arcane Octad. Nether oak uses the tree and stat block, but his speaks common pronoun. When the characters arrive, the nether oak is in deep slumber. To complete the rite of the Arcane Octad, they must craft a wand from the wood of this tree. Gathering wand without waking the tree requires a successful DC 20 Dex stealth check. Meant to depart with some of its wood with a DC 15 charisma check. Attacks 4 needle blights spring from the ground to assist it acting on the same initiative count. Interesting. It doesn't explicitly say in the book. Yeah, it is in transmutation. But that's from the Expanded Towers of Magic. I don't know if that's actually from the original book. So it's possible that they, unless it's an encounter. Is it an encounter? Tomb Tapper, Big B's Hand. Cold Fanatics of Avarice is an Ethrin. Spitting Mimic, Cold Light Walker if Oral's an Ethrin. Gargoyles, Frost Giant, Skeleton Winter Wolves, Magian, Nothics. Oh, it does say they speak Laros instead of Uncommon. Okay, I'm glad they said that because I was confused. And weirdly, you can just meet the boss as a random encounter. That's kind of fucked up. Otherwise, yeah, it's possible the drow mentioned in the book. I don't know how far. I'll have to go back to that section. I don't think they were supposed to have ever made it very far. I think they were waiting for like a bigger team to come. What number's the drow at? Drow outposts. He intends to launch a full-blown exploration into the ruins of Ethrin, while he and his fellow drow discovered a few weeks ago. The drow entered the Caves of Hunger, scaling a rimraz tunnel that connects to the Underdark. Ilzebek has asked the matron mother of his house to send reinforcements, but they are weeks away. So I guess it doesn't technically say how far they've made it in Ethrin. It sounds like they've discovered the city is there, but maybe they haven't actually gone there that much. Although then the Dryad mentions the fact that they've been going back and forth. So it's unfortunate the book never really clearly spells out like how far they've made it or what they've done. Just leaves that up to the DM to figure out. So if I'm smart, I would actually look ahead and try to tie this in. Like, if she was a part of Ethrin, would she have been in this arboretum? Although it doesn't look like on the map that like a piece of the arboretum got ripped apart. Maybe she was inside of a building, so maybe it was a different area. Yeah, that would be a fun tease for her to be able to talk about Treant. I could also give her abilities similar to that, where she could summon like needle blights or something. Although that's not gonna be worth a combat encounter. I have to use like the strongest version of the blights. Or use some awakened tree stat blocks or do something to turn her into a fun little boss fight. Tree Blight and Curse of Strahd. Vine Blight, I think, is the slightly stronger version. Or one half. I guess Twig Blight is actually, right? It's Needle Blight and then Twig Blight? No, Twig Blight's the smallest one. CR18. Needle Blight is the next one up. Know your blights. Yeah, 1/4. which have really no abilities that make it worth running whatsoever against a high-powered party. I guess you could always do the minion combat, be like, oh, they die in one hit, but also, like, offense-wise, they're hardly worth caring about. What if I just search tree? Monoloth is more about outwitting it. Yeah, I think it's more of a social scene. The library is also completely skippable, even though library seems like an obvious place to go to in a Lost City. I am wishing we had a wizard on the team. There's a lot of cool stuff for wizards to know about and learn about. Although credit to Raymond for definitely role-playing Edmund like a very knowledge-hungry, knowledge-seeking character, so that certainly helps. But it's a shame because like there's literally like one of the like a couple of the big loot things are like, oh, you get a spell book with all these cool like ancient spells in it, and I think only a wizard's gonna give a shit about that. Could use like Awakened Tree stats, like maybe you could do some kind of layer action for the Dryad. Oh, you know what I could do, Eric? You could look up home field advantage on Dryad and see if there's anything there. That might be a useful thing to do. Dryad's included in here. Dryad on page 81. 81, we're only the D's. Good lord, I forgot how big of a book this is. The Dryad's magic has flowed through to the trees around her lair, and if the Dryad is attacked, the force itself might come to her aid. Yes, that's what I was thinking. I'm reading from the Home Field Advantage book. Unless they are a special type of tree, such as a tree ant, these trees have 59 hit points, armor class of 13, vulnerability to fire damage, +2 to con saving throws made to maintain concentration on a spell. They cannot take any actions or move unless made to do so by a layer action. So is that supposed to help her tree stride ability because she can go in and out of trees? Right, can use 10 feet of movement to step magically into one dead tree within her reach. I'll have to change that. And emerge from a second dead tree within 60 feet of the first tree, creating occupied space. That doesn't mean she can that just means she can walk between them, though. Vine Lore does sound familiar. I have to look that one up. Alright, layer actions for a Dryad. The Dryad summons a Fey Spirit to assist her. The Fey Spirit takes on the appearance and uses the stat block of a boar, elk, or giant badger. I don't really like that one. Summon animal seems great for a Dryad, but in this case, I don't think would necessarily work. Number 2, the tree bound to the Dryad uses its natural magic to enhance her abilities. The tree casts the spell Bless on the Dryad, maintaining concentration so she doesn't have to. That's kind of interesting. Dryad channels Fey power through her lair, enchanting the area using the spell Hallow. The Dryad can only choose to use the Courage, Daylight, Energy Protection, Everlasting, Rest, or Tongue's effect of the Hallow spell. I'm not familiar with the Hallow spell. The trees in the region channel magic through their leaves and cast the spell Gust of Wind, maintaining the concentration on the spell so the Dryad doesn't have to. That one uses the trees. I was going to use the trees as like melee, like they can use like slams or entangles and things. This one uses it more of like spells, which is an interesting idea. I think blessing the Dryad would help though, because I actually want to use the Dryad as a... Mainly because I want to use the Dryad as the spellcaster. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Use the Awakened Trees. Using that Duskthorn Dryad stat block, I can have her be the spellcaster, so she could actually cast spells like Wall of Thorns, Counterspell, Entangle. All of those are concentration, and then just Magic Missile. She could just shoot, and I could flavor that as like thorns shooting out, basically, peppering them. And then at the same time, you could have... the bad thing is they would just be focus firing her, so if I don't have literal Awakened Trees with like hit points and stuff, she's going to go down really quick, even if she's got legendary actions like of these trees activating and slamming and attacking. But maybe that part of it, maybe you don't want to have it last too terribly long. She instantly like, cries out and like retreats into her tree, and players have to feel morally conflicted. Yeah, I could just use a slam attack right here. Something she could do as like a legendary action or a layer action. But I might spawn some lights or something. Or what was the one you said? The Vine Lord? I'll search Vine. Throw an Assassin Vine in there and instantly make it a lot harder. These things are crazy. There's also a Vine Golem, but I think that one's a lot stronger. We are 7 for the Vine Lore. This is... I need more of a minion, though. The Blights would be more... I could always take a Blight and, like, scale it up a little bit. Or maybe use, like, Awakened Tree, but it's really an Awakened Bush. Isn't that something you can do? Like, smaller? Or a shrub, okay. It's an Awakened Shrub. It's an ordinary shrub. Okay, it's laughably terrible. It's Rake. Hey, you know what? Fucking, that can hurt. Like, give me an Awakened Rosebush, because that shit is painful. We've got a freaking Rosebush out front that's now dangerously close to where we get into our cars, and it's really annoying to walk past that thing. But I like the idea of turning what could be a social scene into a possible common encounter. There you go. You could throw the rotten fruit at the players. That'd be pretty fun. Those purple pears. No purple pears. No more pears for you. I feel like I need to figure out where in Ethrin she is and how much information she knows. It would obviously be better for me that she doesn't know very much. But you don't want to make her completely of a useless social scene either. And I really worry about telling the players about the drow as a way for it's almost like the DM saying, hey, you need to go talk to these drow and check them out. Which maybe I mean, that's not the end of the world, they can. I just feel bad about, like, pointing out this thing that I could otherwise completely skip because they can completely skip it. And, like, hey, it doesn't, you know, we've got so much going on, we don't need to do this whole drow element. So honestly, I'm still on the fence of whether or not to include them or not. I don't think it would be that hard to just ignore them completely. The only difference is, why have Nothics come up other than they've just, you know, I don't know, maybe maybe they just sense that the Caves of Hunger have opened up, because I think the Nothics coming up is supposed to have been pretty recent. Although why wouldn't the creatures? I mean, if the path, because the way opened up was always the end of the Caves of Hunger, whereas Caves of Hunger has always been, as far as I know, connected to Ethrin. So more creatures could have come up from Ethrin. But maybe it's because the Mythalar got reactivated a few weeks or months ago, whatever it's been for me, and so maybe that's driving more of the creatures away from Ethrin, because Ethrin itself is becoming so much more dangerous. And maybe that's why only recent, and maybe that's a piece of information she can give, that is, even though she's kind of fuzzy on the time, she goes, it just feels like recently these terrible creatures have come up, and they don't seem to make sense. I'm afraid of them. You know, it would definitely play up, like, the fear angle of what's going on in there. Well, you have the 4 classes to choose from: Fighter, Cleric, Wizard, and Thief. The classics. There's something to be said about games that make you start as, like, a basic-ass class like that, and then you expand into the more, like, interesting specialized classes, and D&D does this to an extent, but they still have you choose from, like, 11 or something at the beginning, and then you can specialize from there. But you could even go further in another game system and say, no, you have to start as, like, one of these basic ass archetypes, see how you feel about that, and then you can further specialize into this, and then you can further specialize into this. I guess the problem is it makes low levels all start very, very similar to each other at the beginning, but I always think it's very tricky, especially in, like, what is it, Pathfinder, that has, like, 30 classes or something. Like, you make people make these huge choices right at the beginning when they really don't know, you know, unless you've already played a bunch of these classes and have that experience, like, how those things play out. Problem with a lot of RPGs, I feel like, where they have this class-based system. And it's something to be said for the skill-based system, like an Elder Scrolls game, that you don't have to make those big choices. You can just, you know, create your class or create your character, and then just play around with whatever skills, and then you end up just being better at whatever skills you end up doing. Anyway, I could go off on all these different cool rants with you folks, so I enjoy it very much, but I think that is definitely going to do it for this week's Crafting Icewind Dale. If you enjoy the content, please, or this Thursday edition, please do check out patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, William, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic Roleplay Roll, Christopher Bryant, William, David, Corey, Go at 1337, Matthew, Big Nut, John, Infernus, Chris, Scott, and Gene. And gold patrons, RPG, Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fast Like a Tortoise, Scott, Refus, Corey, and William. Thank you all very much for your support. If you are a Platinum patron, please do sign up for our second January game. You'll need to sign up by Friday evening. The game will be next week. For the rest of you, I will see you all for D&D tomorrow night.